My name is Diana Schwartz Francisco. I'm an assistant instructional professor in history here at the University of Chicago, and I teach in the Center for Latin American Studies. Center for Latin American Studies. I teach Latin American and Caribbean studies.
My name is Mehrnoush Soroush. I'm an assistant professor of landscape archaeology at University of Chicago.
I'm Julie Carmalt, and I am a senior lecturer in the Brooks School of Public Policy here at Cornell University. And I also direct the Master of Health Administration program, and I teach two population health courses here on campus.
I'm Janet Loebach. I'm an assistant professor in human-centered design at Cornell.
Right away, my brain says, let's map this out. And how can we utilize GIS or interactive mapping tools like Policy Map to help students understand this concept of where you grow up matters? Now I'm really focused on drilling down into neighborhood level data. So now that big health data sets have, like the American Community Survey, sometimes it's census data, sometimes it's health survey data like the BRFSS. And once we have multiple years of data, we can get data down at the neighborhood level. And that's what I want my students to understand, is that literally 2 bus stops apart, you might have a community where there's 20 years difference in life expectancy. And it's because of access to resources or educational differences.
I'm often thinking right from the beginning of how I collect my data so that I can analyze it do some spatial analyses and also visualize and present that data in a visual way. I find maps are extremely helpful for helping me communicate my findings.
So I think I'll start by saying that I don't work with the technical data of GIS. My data are the maps themselves. In my research and in my teaching, I'm much more focused on historical maps, and georeferencing is probably kind of the most data-specific work that I tend to do with my students. I'm working from the source first, so I'm asking myself, in what ways could I, for my own research, or my students in the classroom, draw from this particular map or data that, acts in parallel or in concert with a map, in order to make use of, or in order to render something using GIS.
Okay.
So yeah, it's early and it's source-based.
I have them think a little bit about what kind of data they want to understand, what kind of attributes in the environment they want to explore. And then usually I have to guide them, because most of them start with really broad questions. So the part where I get really to talk about GIS is once they kind of laid out these broad questions, which are very vague, I tell them, well, GIS cannot explain. It cannot tell you why or how. Now, can you break down these questions into some specific questions that deal with what, where, how much? So this is how basically I introduce them to the power, but also limitations of GIS.
I understand that I need to give them some foundation there. I might be deep in my projects. They need some context. They need to understand what I know or don't and what I'm looking for. So I typically will give them sort of brief overview of the project's objectives, and then either data that I have or specific data that I'm looking for. So sometimes I might be reaching out because I'm inquiring about resources. I'm like, how do I find data on this, or who has access to this, or at what level can I get this kind of data? Other times it's related to a technical issue we're having, or there's a certain spatial analysis that I'd like to do, but I don't know how to do it. And so I do try to provide, a decent, without overburdening them, but an overview of really what I'm trying to do, what I've either already attempted and then having trouble with, or particular data sources I'm looking for, and I'll specify what geographical area. What I don't get asked, but I would appreciate being asked, is how much experience I have already. So often, like the first bits of advice I get are often really basic things that I know and I've already done, and so there's often an assumption that you don't know anything, and so I think that would be more useful to say, okay, what are you coming in with this, with, and what do you understand about this data or these analyses to start, or how much experience have you had with GIS? I think that would be helpful, so we can kind of skip over the pieces I do know and just focus on the other parts.
I'm recalling my first time interacting with Cecilia on this very issue, right? And so it was for a course on development and environment in Latin America. I knew I wanted to use maps. I wanted students to do critical analyses of maps, and then eventually use story maps for a final project. I came to that first meeting with Cecilia, and she asked me at that first meeting, right, sort of, what are the learning objectives of this assignment? And how does that translate back to or relate to GIS, right? So I had to, I knew that I had a goal in mind, tried a learning objective in mind, but I didn't really think about what the GIS part of the goal was until Cecilia asked me how GIS could sort of facilitate that, or what part did GIS have in the learning goal. I really wanted students to think about maps as products of a particular place and time, of renderings, as much a sort of reflection of how people understand space as a reflection of their priorities, right? Or impartialities. But I also wanted students to become familiar with GIS from a humanistic perspective, if that kind of, I don't know if that makes sense, but a lot of our students are, if they have familiarity with GIS, it's because they're like already kind of on a data science track. So yeah, I wanted them to think about kind of the merging, I guess, of the quantitative social sciences with the humanistic or qualitative social sciences.
I literally submitted a help ticket at the Mann Library, and somehow miraculously I was connected to Keith Junkins, who is a GIS librarian, and we met and worked together to, he led a GIS workshop where I gave him the state level data on these various health outcomes. And he walked over a 2-day course, walked my students through how do you use GIS? What is a FIPS code? How is health data geolocated? And then took them through an actual project where they built these health maps. And I thought, I was highly impressed and surprised because I didn't think Keith would talk about pedagogy. I didn't think that he would do a lesson plan with learning objectives. And I got a 5-page lesson plan that literally, and I sat alongside my students and we're turning the page and we're all working together. And it was like a miracle. They literally walked out of the lab in the library with health maps that they could then write up and submit as a project. I actually sent him an article that I can't pull off the top of my head, but it was a sort of a public health map making 101. And he read that. That was the article assigned to my students. And Keith read the article and matched the assignment to that article. So how do you insert a north? How do you create an appropriate legend? What happens if you tweak the legend? How can you bias the results with the legend breaks and avoid not biasing results? It was really quite remarkable, that partnership on that assignment. And I think the questions I was asking him were really the how-to questions, and he was really focused on and what do you want your students to know? What are the outcomes that you want them to achieve? And so not only did they get to understand how health is geographically distributed and often inequitably, but they also got that technical understanding of health mapping.